Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deirdre Wheatley-Liss, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our continuing webinar series sponsored by Porzio, and today, Peace Aging Care. Today's topic is supporting an aging loved one, the intersection of elder care and elder law. And just by way of disclaimer at the top of the hour, while I am a lawyer, I am not necessarily your lawyer. If you need actual legal advice or if you need actual care management advice, you need to speak to somebody who is looking at your family's unique situation. So with that, if you can flip the slide, please. I'd like to introduce myself in a little more detail. I'm a principal in the wealth preservation area of Porzio. We've also recently founded PorzioPlanning.com, which is a website dedicated to looking at estate planning and elder law and special needs issues. Today, I am delighted to be joined by my friend Trish Barbosa. Trish is a geriatric care manager. For years, we have worked together on various cases, looking at the actual intersection of elder law and elder care for specific clients. Trish, do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a registered nurse, and I'm the owner of Peace Aging Care Experts, which is a geriatric care management firm now in its 15th year, I'm proud to say. I have a team of care managers, and we work with folks who are elderly, who have mental illness and developmental disabilities, and we'll talk a little bit more about what I do in a little bit.
All right, that sounds terrific. So we ask for questions during these sessions because while Trish and I know what we would like to talk about, what we don't know is what you would like to hear. So the way to make this much more informative to you and interactive is to use the question and answers feature that the webinar provides. So just so that we know what our audience is, I just want to ask a question to begin with. So if you can go to the Q&A box, and when you type it in, no one else will see it, just you. We're curious, how many of you are caregivers currently? And if you are, put a 1 in the box. And how many of you are not caregivers currently, but are concerned that you might become caregivers in the future? If so, if you can put a 2 in the box. And I'll give that a second for those to come in, and then we'll see where we are sort of with what it is that our audience is looking at here today. Okay, so looking at it coming in, it looks that some of you are actively caregiving right now, but for most of you, this is more informational to be able to determine if what you might need to do if someone in your family needs care at some point in time in the future. And what does care look like? So if you can flip to the next slide. I think that it's so important to frame this conversation is to give consideration to the aging population that we have here in this country. And we hear about it all the time, the silver tsunami, the baby boomers and things along those lines. But here, if you actually look at this, right now, folks that are 65 and plus, and 65 is the cutoff age for seniors by the federal government. This is from the 2010 census. So if you feel you're not a senior at 65, it's not us, it's the federal government. It's 15% of the population, but that percentage is supposed to grow to 23% by 2050. So near a quarter of the population will be over the age of 65. And the takeaway I hope that you have from this particular slide is that you're not alone in this. If you feel that you're the only person who's dealing with aging loved ones, statistically speaking, out of every 4 people, there's probably 1 of you that's dealing with it. If you flip to the next slide, also, in looking at aging, we're getting older. So the amount and the percent of the population over 85 is growing as well. It's not even 10% of the population today and is looking to be over 20% in 2050. So Trish, as a geriatric care manager, what sort of concerns you about these trends?
I worry that families are going to need to know how to be prepared for when their loved ones age because as you said, so many people are getting older. They're getting much older than 75 years old. And with so many seniors getting older, one of the biggest concerns is dementia, which we're seeing a lot of now. I imagine if we don't get it cured soon, we're going to be seeing even more of it down the line. So I think it's important that families know what resources are available to help them care for a family member.
I think that's very important. So in terms of looking at those resources, if you can flip to the next slide, oftentimes the first level of care are family members as caregivers. Trish, what are your thoughts about family members acting as caregivers to their loved ones?
Well, I work with a lot of clients who do have family members who are involved one way or another. Some are hands-on caregivers and other ones are managing the care of loved ones in facilities. But for the ones who are home, it's a big responsibility and it can be done provided that you have the right mindset, the right support, and the right resources available.
So one of the things that I tell my clients when I'm working with them is, unlike Trish, you are not trained to actually be a caregiver to somebody. And I see so much pressure in the family because what tends to happen just statistically, or in my own non-statistical sample, it tends to be women in the family, whether it's wives or daughters-in-law. If they have full-time jobs. At this point in time, they may have kids that are either still at home or in college, so they have all these other obligations. They may be at a point in their career where they're really at the maximum place in their career from an income standpoint. And now they're basically taking on another full-time job of being a caregiver. And frankly, sometimes they're not very good at it, not because they don't want to be, not because they don't love their parents or their aunts and uncles, but because they haven't been trained to do it. I also see that there's an emotional issue. So Trish, for example, you mentioned dementia. Dementia is a terrible disease. You know, your father looks the same, but his behaviors have entirely changed. And for you to be seeing that and dealing with that, there's a huge emotional component of depression for the person who's doing the caregiving. So often when I'm working with families, I talk to them about how can you arrange a team around you so that you can be still children to your parents, nieces and nephews to your aunts and uncles, not necessarily being caregivers. And the other reason for that is sometimes the person who's taking on the care role, it creates huge amount of friction with the siblings. The person rightfully who's taking on all the care feels that nobody else is chipping in. And then the people who that person thinks aren't chipping in think that they're doing their fair share. It just doesn't make for happy Thanksgiving dinners. So with that, we often recommend that when there is a care issue, that it be evaluated by a geriatric care manager, because we're looking at the financial and legal sides of things. We work with Trish to be able to say, what do we need to know from the care and from the healthcare perspective? So Trish, so many people have never heard of a geriatric care manager before. Could you maybe tell us just generally what one does? And if you can just flip to the next slide real quick.
Sure. Well, what might surprise everyone is that this year, our professional association, which is the Aging Life Care Association, it's made up of about 2,000 folks who do what I do nationwide. We are celebrating our 35th anniversary this year. So we've been around for a while. We just haven't done that great a job, I guess, at letting people know that we're here. So we've been working on that. We've been working on that very hard. I talk to families all the time and they'll say, oh, I wish I knew about you 10 years ago. So back in the day when care management first started, it was mainly a social work field. And then as time went on, nurses like myself found that, you know what, it's a really good fit for my skill set too. And as a nurse, I can serve even more comprehensively as a medical liaison. And you know, all of our clients have, even if they have dementia, most of them also have medical issues too, or there's some crisis going on. And so by and large, care managers are health and human service specialists, and we guide, support, advocate with families for their loved ones or with responsible parties. Not everyone is a family member. Sometimes you have neighbors or attorneys or appointed people who are pitching in to help someone as well. And we help them identify the right resource that's affordable, or resources that are affordable and sustainable, to make sure that the caregiving situation is as safe and healthy as possible.
That's excellent. And again, if anyone has a question, because until about 4 minutes ago, you never heard of a geriatric care manager, please make sure to ask them in the question box, and we can then go over that. The other thing is then, so if it's the intersection of care and law, what does an elder law attorney do? So when I'm asked to describe what elder law is, I use the word holistic. And you can look at that because Trish and I work together with clients, with other individuals, because as lawyers, our niche, so to say, if you want to go back to the prior slide, please, our niche is really looking at what are the documents that you have? Do you have legal capacity? And if not, what needs to be taken care of as a result of it? What finances do you have to be able to provide for your care? And one of the ways that then Trish and I would work together is looking at what kind of care needs do you have so that we're able to target how the finances come together with what we're looking at. Long-term care costs, I use the word astronomical, and I do not use that word lightly. So just some statistics. In New Jersey, the average cost of an assisted living facility is $6,700 a month. Now, you have to understand when you go to assisted living, that's the base rate. They then have step-up levels where you're paying for additional services beyond that. Hiring a home health aide, you might say, hey, I'm going to save myself tons of money, and you may save some money. The average cost there is $4,385 a month. That's to have somebody come into your home to be able to assist you. And if you need skilled nursing care, we're looking at a little bit north of $11,000 a month to be able to pay for that. So because of that, from a financial perspective, there absolutely has to be planning around what it is that can be done in order to maximize the assets that the family has. And then Trish, one of the things that you mentioned is that a geriatric care manager looks at things efficiently. What other programs are available? And I really see that as a way that families can try to stretch the limited dollars that they have. Is that something that you've had people talk to you about?
Oh, plenty. We have, as care managers, we have something we call the long view. So if a family comes to us with an issue, we don't want them to blow a lot of money on care now, and then in 2 years, their loved one is still going to need care and there's no money left. So we like to look at the situation. We start every case by meeting with the person who has whatever issue. Most of the time it's dementia, but not all the time. But we sit and we do a full assessment of every body system. Because like I said, sometimes you have dementia, but you also have other medical issues going on. And with or without dementia, we do a comprehensive review of everything: medications, doctors, medical history, surgical history, hospitalizations, falls, personal preferences. We like a social history. So we kind of say, what did you enjoy doing back in the day? What were your interests? Because maybe that's something that we can pull back into their plan of care now. We also have to talk to the family or the elder law attorney just to get an idea of what resources are available, because we want to make sure that whatever recommendations we make and whatever resources we identify, that the plan of care that we're offering is something that is affordable and sustainable. A lot of people eventually will be spending through their money on the long-term care. For instance, with dementia, I'm just mentioning it a lot because it's one of the most common. But it's a very prolonged illness, an average of 10 years. And not a whole lot of people have 10 years worth of funds to cover that. So we want to make sure with the elder law attorney that what the resources are, options for using them in the most efficient way, and that if and when the money runs out, the person can stay where he or she is and continue to receive the same quality and level of care that they were enjoying before the money ran out. That's a big one.
So if you could flip 2 slides. So, one of the things that I'm hoping that you're hearing from this is there's a team around, because we need to look at so many different issues. So again, with mentioning dementia, but a skilled nursing facility, if you're out of pocket on a skilled nursing facility, $120,000 a year. And a lot of times you have to liquidate assets to pay for that. If they're retirement assets, as an example, there might be income tax on it. If you're selling stocks and bonds, there could be capital gains on it. So in terms of the assessment, Trish, which is your starting point, and I just want to do a footnote, we are doing this during the time of COVID. So there's not a lot of we don't want to be coming in contact with some of our senior clients because we don't want to be in any way putting them in harm's way. How are you doing a needs assessment today that you had talked about?
Well, I'm going to avoid using the word pivot because that word is used everywhere these days. But I'm going to say that we have transitioned in some new services. So thankfully, if this pandemic had to happen, at least it happened in a time when technology is really up. So we have, if we're doing an assessment, usually if the client doesn't have an iPad or a cell phone with the ability to do FaceTime or Zoom, someone near them does, whether it's a family member or an aide or a facility or something. So what we've been doing during COVID is video assessments. And even though it's not as great for a number of reasons, I love to be in front of someone. I love to be holding their hand and really relating to them. But what it does do is it does allow us to develop a bit of a relationship and to kind of become a familiar face. And as you know, as nurses and social workers and care managers, our job is to assess. We don't look at anyone without assessing them. So we learn a lot. A picture's worth 1,000 words. So we get that. We've been doing video assessments, and then just like we would with an in-person assessment, we're filling in the blanks with families on a lot of the medical history that maybe the client doesn't know about. Now that New Jersey's numbers are a little bit better, I do have full PPE for my team, and in some cases what we're doing is we're meeting with clients in person but outside, and we're wearing our masks. We ask the client to wear a mask, but we understand that's not always possible. But we're wearing the type of mask that protect us and the client. So so that's what we've been doing.
So with the needs assessment, so one of the things that you didn't mention that I think is so critical for people who are concerned about aging parents is the physical location, so that when they're still at home. I remember it was probably one of the first times that Trish and I were talking about how deadly area rugs can be for somebody who's older, right? Because you can trip over them, they can cause all sorts of issues. So one of the other things is if you're looking at what am I going to do for my loved one, is taking a real good look at their physical environment, because if somebody's goal is to age in place, and many people's goal is to be able to age in place, if there's something in their physical space that makes it more likely that they could get physically injured, it's less likely that they're going to be able to achieve their goal of being able to stay in place. So we actually got a question that came in, so I'm just going to step aside for that. The geriatric care management, is that covered in any way by insurance or long-term care benefits? How does that work?
Well, I will tell you that unfortunately it's not covered by Medicare or any type of group insurance or supplemental insurance, but there are, depending on the policy for long-term care, there are usually benefits to pay for a geriatric care manager, but not always. And so what I usually tell families is if they have a long-term care insurance policy, I'm happy to take a look at it if they want me to, just to see if it's something that would be covered.
Excellent. So one of the other things that you do is you act as a medical liaison, and I'm going to let you actually describe it, but here's the situation that I've had with clients. They have a family member who's here in New Jersey because they've been here in New Jersey, their community's in New Jersey, but the children are scattered all across the country. And mom, dad, whomever is going to the doctor, and they know that they're going to the doctor, but they have no idea what's going on. The children just don't have any clarity into the situation. And I know, Trish, this is something that you and your team do, is that you're really able to facilitate, I'm going to call it maximizing those doctor's visits. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, I call us the second set of skilled ears. That's really what we are. As people age, a lot of times they'll listen to a doctor and say, yes, doctor, but not really absorb everything that the doctor's saying. So that's our job. Our job is to be there listening, asking questions they wouldn't know to ask necessarily, and making sure that the doctor gets really accurate information about what's going on at home so that he or she can come up with the right treatment plan to address it. And then beyond that, once the client goes home, we make sure that the doctor's recommendations are followed through. If he says cut the blood pressure pill in half and add this one, we can set up their medications for them to make sure that there's good medication compliance, just to promote overall health.
So let's talk more about some of that medication compliance, because I see this all the time. You've got this bag of pills in the morning, you got this one here, you got this one for after lunch. I've read stories that, sometimes people have lots of doctors and the doctors aren't necessarily knowing what else it is that people are taking. How do you and your team, help people, maybe they've got an aide in the house or there's a child in the house that is saying that you need to be doing X, Y, Z. The medication can be great, but if the medication is counteracting with something else, that could be a very dangerous situation. So with your background, how are you able to assist with that?
So we're big on reconciling medication because it's true. There's no one really pulling it all together for them. That's our role. If we go with the client to see their primary doctors and then go with clients to see their specialist doctors, we can make sure that the medication list is accurate and that every professional, every doctor knows what the other doctors have prescribed. And that's really a big part. That's a big thing for us because errors can be made in the blink of an eye, and you might not even realize it. So that's a big part of what we do for families.
And I do recall that prior to the COVID situation, you were also providing transportation for folks. Maybe they're in an assisted living facility, and again, the children aren't around. At this point, are doctors going to see? How are people seeing their specialist doctors right now?
Well, I will tell you, in the height of COVID, nobody really was seeing doctors. Doctors were closed. They were doing visits on the phone. They were doing telehealth when there was the ability to do that. And again, I think going forward, just like my video assessments may always be an option for families now that we've done it, and someday we'll be able to do in-person visits. We may still hang on to this. I think the same is true for doctors. They may continue to do the telehealth. I'll tell you what's nice is you're not waiting for the doctor to come on the computer. You can be waiting in the waiting room. So it's really pretty good. So they've been doing telehealth visits. Now, over the last probably month or two, they're doing a very good job of keeping their waiting rooms empty. When you drive to the office, you wait in the parking lot, they call you to let you know when to come in. So they've been really refining that.
So one of the other things that I'm just picking on topics that we've worked on together for clients is residential relocation. Many times people say, well, I want to age in place no matter what. Sometimes that can be challenging though. If you're in Brooklyn and you've got everything around you at your fingertips and people are checking in on you every day, that's one scenario. If you're living in Western Morris County or up in Sussex County and you don't have the ability to interact with your community, aging in place can be very lonely. It can be isolating. So because of that, there are times when we're looking at having people relocate to assisted living, both to get care and also, quite frankly, to get some kind of community, to get some socialization. I had a client one time, her daughter called me up and she was crying. I said, what's the matter? So I called my mother today, on my way home from work, and her voice sounded scratchy, and I asked her what was wrong. And her mom said, well, there's nothing wrong with me. I just haven't spoken to anybody all day. And that's very sad. So I know that you help families, sort of look at what are residential options other than being at home. And many times for us, it does tend to come up where there's two spouses and one spouse has just passed away. And while the two of them together were able to be independent, the one person is no longer independent. How do you help families with that?
Well, this is what we do. We really talk to families about what makes sense. Sometimes, I always say if there are finances available, we can keep anybody home, except for someone maybe who's a brittle diabetic or someone who has the tendency to wander. That can be difficult. But most of the time, we can provide whatever care they need in the home. The problem is that if the financial resources are limited, and most are, there might come a time where that's not affordable anymore, because if they run out of money at home, the government benefits don't pay for 24-hour care at home, only in a facility. So there is a strategy to deciding from a financial point and a care point when it makes sense to move to a facility. But not everyone does best at home. If someone is very social and we saw a lot of isolation over COVID, and once we were able to see our clients again, we could really see that the lack of socialization tremendously impacted them, their cognition. So what we do as care managers, and I have to say, as a member of the Aging Life Care Association, as Aging Life Care professional, we are prohibited from having any financial tie to any resource that we recommend, which is perfect. We work for the client and only the client, so we can share our best vetted resources we would use for our own family with no strings attached. We don't have any reason to recommend one service or one facility over another, except that we think it's what's best. So I think that's important for people to know. And what we do is we do the assessment. We take a look at what the financial resources are, and with keeping in mind also what the government benefits will be if the money runs out. And we have a strategy for helping families make the decision. When is the right time? Where is the right place? Where is the care the best? Where does it meet their financial abilities? And then we just lead them to those options. We make sure that there are facilities that have rooms available so that families can go out and see these places and say, you know, my mom could go in any of these facilities. All of these are choices right now. So we really just kind of tee it up for them, and then the decision is theirs.
Yeah, so I want to I'm going to jump ahead and then come back. So we have this chart here, and we've been talking about the care manager role and about the attorney role. But it really is a team of people. Obviously, the family is involved. Financial advisors have to be involved because we need to know, you know, Trish, you've mentioned it several times, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. The amount of assets that are available to you in some ways dictates what the plan of care is. That's not dictating the quality of care, but it's absolutely dictating the plan of care. Residential support, whether that's at home or in a facility, and what daily care is needed and the best way of doing that. You know, I've had folks where, again, it's usually the daughters go down on Sunday and they make all the food for the week. But sometimes they get down the following Sunday and the food hasn't really been eaten at all. So what, you know, maybe you don't need somebody living in the house, but maybe you need something in the way of additional support. And I know that you do a lot of scaling around that. I want to talk to the point that you just mentioned, though, about, you know, what you have in the way of assets. Unfortunately, the way that our government benefit situation is set up, Medicare pays basically health hospitalization. If they can make you better, Medicare is going to pay for it. If it's a long-term degenerative disease, dementia, Parkinson's, you had a stroke, and as a result of the stroke, you don't have mobility anymore. That type of care that you now need, because you need assistance with eating, with dressing, with bathing, whatever the case may be, Medicare does not pay for that. The only government program that pays for that are either veterans benefits, but we don't have that many veterans in our population anymore, or Medicaid. Medicaid is means tested, which is to say that you can't have money in your name. And a lot of planning that we do with families is around the idea of how do we set aside some funds, because we're not sick now. We're concerned we might get sick in the future. How do we set aside some funds so that if we need to spend down all of our money, there's still some security here for our family, because, you know, my wife still needs to be able to live in the house. It's great that the house is an exempt asset, but our real estate taxes are $18,000 a year. You know, how is it that we plan around all of those things? And one of the key things I want to talk about with facilities versus aging in place. Many facilities have what is commonly referred to as a private pay requirement, which is to say they will accept you on Medicaid, and because they're required to do that under law. However, they won't accept you on the front end unless you have a certain amount of assets. So sometimes it might be like $50,000, $100,000. Sometimes it might be 3 months, 6 months, whatever the case may be. But in order to get into the facility, you have to have not already spent that amount of money. And Trish, I think that was one of the things that you were alluding to when looking at a facility, is being very cognizant if this is the place that's going to be best for dad to be able to be. Dad loves it, you love it, everybody else loves it, but you want to wait until you have to go there. When you have to go there because of the way that the government benefits work, might be sooner than you would logically think you need to go there. Can you comment on that?
Sure, and I'll say with assisted living, it's actually, it sounds strange, but it costs more money in private pay. You have to show that you have more assets up front, because they generally want 2 years. They want to see that you have the ability to pay for 2 or 3 years privately before transitioning to Medicaid. Nursing homes are a little more lenient. They still like private pay, but there are some who will take someone directly on Medicaid, and then there's kind of a whole range. And I always say that with the nursing homes, it's kind of census dependent. If they have empty beds and they normally want somebody to come in with $100,000 to spend down, and you only have 70, they might say, you know what, that's good enough. So it really kind of depends on timing as well. But with the assisted livings, less so. They're you know, they get paid less from Medicaid, so they try to make up that difference on the front side. So, you know, looking with the family, this is why it's so important for us to be able to help them with the plan for the care. We need to know. I don't need to know account numbers or where the money is. I just kind of need a round number. This is the amount that Medicaid says, you know, the person is going to have to spend down before Medicaid. That in my mind, that's my magic number. That's my budget. So I take a look at that and see, well, is it enough to pay for 2 or 3 years of spend down at an assisted living? You know, and if it's just barely, well, then now might be like a now or never. If you want assisted living, you might not want to stay home and spend that money on home care, because then by the time you're ready for assisted living, you won't have that money to offer. So that's why timing is really important as well.
And so again, and this is really where the intersection of what it is that we do from a planning side, and we're going to talk more about a crisis side as well, but this is really where the intersection is of what we do, because as an example, a client will come to us and say, you know, I'm concerned, I don't want to go bankrupt if I get sick. That's sort of the basic of the conversation. All right. We know what your finances are now, you bring them to us, but what we don't know, because there's a 5-year look back for Medicaid, which is to say that if you do Medicaid planning by transferring assets to a trust, you don't qualify for Medicaid for 5 years. That's a bit of an overstatement for just for purposes of our conversation today. So because of that, when we're doing that type of planning, we make sure that people retain an amount of assets to pay for 5 years of care. But I don't know what 5 years of care is going to look like for this person. So that's really, Trish, when we'll work together, and then Trish will then do a needs assessment, or any geriatric care manager can do a needs assessment to be able to say, right now, you know, if somebody came in the house, you know, they need light housekeeping help, somebody needs to come in the house 4 hours a day, 3 days a week. But as this disease progresses, you're probably looking at these types of expenses. I'm then able, from the legal side, able to take that back in to put into my calculation, so that we're really coming up with a customized plan for the family, because it's unique to your situation in terms of what it is that you want to be able to do with those assets. So that's some of the, you know, sort of how it is that we work together planning around that, when we're looking at somebody who says, I want to be very proactive about securing my assets so that my family inherits something, and I don't end up in a situation where I am, you know, whatever the government gives me is whatever it is that I'm going to get. I think we're all cognizant that the government has spent, you know, huge sums of money. You know, the federal government has spent north of $2.4 trillion on COVID. Was not budgeted for this year. The states, I think we just borrowed $9.9 billion or something for the state of New Jersey. And the services, going back, if you think of the original slides that we have, where we have this aging population, right now, between Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, it's about 50% of the federal budget goes to those items right now. As folks continue to age, there's going to be more and more pressure without necessarily more and more dollars coming in. That's why, while yes, Medicaid is available to you, from a proactive standpoint, and because of this 5-year look back, we strongly encourage people to give some thought to not what happens when I die, but what happens when I get sick. Is there a way I can make myself and my family more secure? So that's on the planning side, but Trish, we don't always have time for planning, because sometimes I get a phone call that says my mom broke her hip and she's in the hospital. What do I do next? And the person on the phone literally doesn't know what to do next. You know, they were sitting at their desk at the office, they got this phone call, they're at the hospital. They have no idea what's going on from a care perspective, from a discharge perspective. And Trish, I really want you to talk about how discharge planning works, because I think it's a very shocking moment for families, and about sort of what the next steps are. So I get that phone call. My usual response is, I would love to work with you, but you don't need me right now. You need to be speaking to somebody from the healthcare perspective right now, because you need to get your arms around what your mom's situation is so that we can do a plan. So Trish, you get that phone call. My mom fell, she broke her hip, she's in the hospital. I have no idea what to do next. How do you help families in that situation?
We get that call a lot. So that's really what we're set up to help with as well. So in a situation like that, we can, well, you know, with COVID, everything is a little bit different. At the very least, right now, we get on the phone with the case manager at the hospital to get the information that we need about the clinical care. There's a rule in case management and care management, and it is discharge planning begins on the day of admission. We always have our eye on the discharge plan, and the plan might change as we go, but we're always thinking that way. And people really, really don't get a lot of time in the hospital anymore. So as soon as I hear someone breaks his or her hip, I'm thinking, okay, in 3 or 4 days, we're going to have them someplace. We're going to have a place ready for them to go to for rehab. So we get the clinical information, or in an ideal world, we go to the hospital, meet with the family, get to assess the person and speak with the hospital staff in person. I always say hospital discharge planners have a very, very hard job. They don't work for you. They work for the hospital. The hospital wants to get paid. So when insurance says, they've got to leave tomorrow, we're not paying for any care after tomorrow, they no longer need hospital care, it's the discharge planner's job to get that person's body out the door. Because the hospital is leaning on them. They don't want people that they're not going to be paid for. So the problem for hospital discharge planners, and I feel for them really, is that they just have to get people out. They oftentimes will just have a form that they'll give the family that has a list of local nursing homes and say, please go out and visit and let me know where you want me to send the records. I need 3 places. So the families don't know, and it's really hard. There are some places out there with a beautiful piano in the foyer and you can't get worse care. And there are other places that are very plain and the care is primo. So how is a family supposed to know? The discharge planner hasn't had an opportunity to go out and see these places. And frankly, she has a busy job. You're not the only person that she's got to get out of the hospital. So she doesn't have time to say, I would go here and not here. She just wants to say there's an empty bed, go. And again, it's not the discharge planner's fault. It's a hard job they have, but a care manager is different. We work for the client. So we can say, no, that's not, we want you to send the records to these 3 facilities. And we call those facilities because we have a relationship with the admissions folks there. And they know that when we refer someone, we're going to make sure that it's a good referral, that there's, even before a skilled nursing facility or a rehab takes somebody in, before they even accept the person, they want to know, what's the discharge plan here? Are we looking at they're going to be going home? Do they have assets to pay for care at home? Could they become a long-term care patient? If it's been a really bad stroke and they live alone, are they going to be long-term? So there are financial questions to answer for the family at every turn. But as a care manager, we're prepared for all of that. So we make sure that our clients get referred to the places, as I said earlier, that we would have our own family. And because we have good relationships with these facilities, they'll accommodate us where maybe they really didn't want to take somebody in right then, but because they work with us and they appreciate our relationship, they'll accommodate. So that's, our job is to make sure that our clients get the very best care so they have the very best outcome from whatever condition or injury they're dealing with, and helping the family along the way in steps get used to the changes that are coming to their loved one's life and that will be affecting them as well.
So I just want to highlight a couple of the points that you talked about. So if no one's been in this situation, in the hospital, you have 3 days to figure out where mom and dad are going to go. You've been pulled out of your job because your parent is obviously very, very ill because they're in the hospital. You may be running back and forth trying to take care of your own family at the same time. Quite frankly, you have 0 time to go and explore 3 facilities. And to Trish's point, I don't find that I would not have the ability to go into one facility versus another and know what the care is and how well it would end up working for my family. I often have people call me, so-and-so got discharged from the hospital, the place that they went to was horrible. I don't know if the place that they went to is horrible or not. All I know is that it's not a good fit. So if you're taking just one thing away from our talk today, if you have anyone in your circle of families that has a sudden crisis with an older loved one, they may not know that somebody that is a geriatric care manager, this job even exists. Please share with them, because we can't make people better, but we can take away some of the friction of the process because of the experience that we have. Because while we've gone through this hundreds, thousands of times, you will go through it 0 to 1 to 2 times in your lifetime. And you don't want to be learning on the job with this particular one. One of the things that I want to talk about is, from a financial and a medical point of view. So Trish, obviously, when you're engaging with somebody, you have to have them sign off on, from a HIPAA policy perspective, HIPAA being our health privacy law, that you're able to get information. Well, what if the person doesn't have the capacity to sign that document at the time? That's what comes back to more, I'm going to call basic estate planning, which is that from a capacity perspective, you need to have documents in place that allow somebody to make substituted judgment for you in the event that you can't make them for yourself. One document is you need to have a power of attorney. That's a financial power that allows somebody else to make medical decisions for you. Your financial power of attorney would be able to sign a HIPAA authorization to give your health information to somebody else if it's properly drafted within the document. Your financial power of attorney, if you don't trust your kids, it doesn't have to be effective now. It can be effective at a point in time where you don't have the ability to make decisions. So you're in the hospital and the doctor signs off and says, in my opinion, they don't have the ability to make financial decisions right now, and that's a springing power of attorney. The other is a healthcare power, which is the same concept, but somebody can make medical decisions for you. Again, the HIPAA provisions could be in the healthcare power that you have. And the last is a living will, which is this is what I want to have happen in the event of a terminal situation. Now, again, talking about COVID, most living wills, ones that I drafted pre-COVID, had language in there specifically around I do not want to be on a ventilator. With COVID, a ventilator can be the best source of management of the disease because we've seen people on and then off ventilators and leaving hospitals. So I would encourage you to take a look at the language around what it is that your aging loved ones have right now in terms of that. Another medical document, I didn't put it on there, but it came to mind, Trish, when you were talking, is a POLST form. So a POLST form is physician's orders for life-sustaining treatment. Did I get that right? And it comes on a green, here, can you see that green piece of paper, about that color green? And what it is that they are medical orders for somebody's in a terminal situation that travel with them. So, if your dad has cancer, he's under a certain amount of treatment, he knows what kind of care he wants, but he gets sick when he's in the assisted living, they will send him to the hospital. That is what their job is. When he's at the hospital, he doesn't necessarily need the 27-year-old resident trying to figure out what's wrong with him because, he's got stage 4 cancer. He knows what's wrong with him. The POLST form is something where the physician and you have already decided the course of care, and now the hospital is just implementing that course of care. Now, Trish, obviously I'm not a medical person. That is my legal explanation of it. Do you have other comments on that?
Sure, and we recommend that for all of our clients. If something should happen to anyone and a squad is called to the house, for instance, an emergency squad, their job is to err on the side of life unless they're told otherwise, unless there's proof, like some written proof. So the POLST is something that anyone with a medical license is required to follow. And basically it's the doctor, it's a meeting between the doctor and the patient, and they talk about what would you want? Would you, if your heart stops, if you die, do you want somebody pounding on your chest to get your heart going again? Do you want someone to put a tube down your throat and put you on a ventilator and breathe for you? If you say, I would never want that, then you fill out the form with the doctor and you both sign it. And once the doctor signs it, it becomes an official doctor's order. So anyone with a medical license is required to follow that. And if they don't, they're risking their own license. The nice thing about the POLST is that you don't have to fill it out at every stop. There used to be a do not resuscitate, right? So you go to the hospital and you say, while I'm here, don't resuscitate me. Then you go to rehab and then you have to fill out another form and say, while I'm here, don't resuscitate me. And if the paperwork gets dropped at any point, you might wind up being resuscitated when that's not what you wanted. The nice thing about the POLST, and I always tell people, make a bunch of copies. I tell the family members, keep a copy in your phone if you can, just have it accessible, because as long as you show it to the medical personnel, they're required to follow it. A copy is just the same as an original, and it doesn't have to be on green paper if it's a copy. So right. I recommend that everybody have it.
The original ones are, so it's because it's actually it's in the statutory legislation. So the POLST form is very important. A couple of other things. So we talked about dementia. If you didn't do any planning, and now somebody needs to be able to make these decisions for you, and which includes where somebody lives decisions, you need a guardianship. So even if you have a power of attorney and a living will, if your loved one is living in a residence and it's not a good environment for them, because you have a power of attorney and a living will, they're still deemed to have capacity. And when you have capacity, you can choose to live in a bad environment. I had a situation with a client, it was about 2 years ago, we had a horrible winter. and the heat had cut off in the house, and she didn't, because of her mental deterioration, didn't even really notice it. And the children went in, the house was like 40 some degrees. And there we did an emergent guardianship application because she was not safe in her home at that particular point in time. So while yes, you need to have the planning documents, the healthcare power, the living will, the power of attorney, you also, if you're looking at dealing with somebody who's aged, there could be situations where from a location standpoint, it is no longer safe. Those documents that I mentioned will not cover that situation. That's a guardianship situation. Our courts do allow for emergent guardianship, either because you're not in a safe location, or the next one I have on here is financial abuse. So if there's an absolute concern that somebody's stealing all the money, we can look at getting an emergent guardianship in place, which would then allow somebody else to be able to make decisions. On the financial abuse, because I'm going to turn to the questions in just a minute, I think that there's this idea that like the caregiver coming in is the one who's stealing all the money. Trish, do you know who steals most of the money by statistically when it comes to financial abuse?
Oh, it's family.
Oh, yeah.
It's family.
It's family. So one of the things then with the idea of this supporting team is you're in the situation, you're dealing with your loved ones, whether you're the primary manager of the family who's dealing with this, or you're one of the other children potentially. Where a lot of these issues happen in my mind is, I think it was FDR who said that sunshine is the best disinfectant. There's not enough transparency of communication. So within this team that we have here on the screen, one of the important things, because everybody needs to be on board to be able to care for the aging loved one, is to be able to make sure that there's good communication. And what do I mean by that? The geriatric care manager can tell you right now, she issues reports on a regular basis. If all the family members agree, everybody can get copies of the reports emailed to them so everybody knows what mom or dad's health care looks like. The person who's acting as the power of attorney, they can just issue a report every month. Here's what happened in the bank account this month. Here's what we paid. Here's the money that we got in, so that there's clarity around that. The child who's maybe taking them to the doctor to get the pulse form, everyone should have copies of the pulse form because you don't know where it is that they're going to be, including in your bedside table, because the EMTs will usually look there for any kind of medication or documentation. So pulling together that team is really critical. What we're trying to illustrate is, in addition to your family team, you also need to have a team of advisors around you that quite simply have just done this before. While we each have our own wheelhouse, we work together to get you from the point of, I think there's a problem, to how do we find a solution to the problem? And then Trish, you mentioned the long view. Now that we have an immediate solution, how do we make sure that that solution can stay in place over a long period of time? I want to go to a couple of questions. If we can just flip to the next slide, please. The first question that we got in here was one around, how do I know if my parent has dementia or they're just getting older? Because I get older and I forget things, right? How do you sort of deal with that so that you know, do I have a medical condition or is this just something that's happening right now?
Well, you know, there's not a blood test to say if it's dementia or not. So it's really looking at the constellation of symptoms. And the best specialists to evaluate that are either a neurologist or a geriatric psychiatrist. And I say often, if someone, sometimes when people develop dementia, they can develop some behavioral changes. They can become very agitated, they can become combative, they can become more verbal, they can become paranoid. There are all kinds of things. And in situations like that, what I recommend is that the person see a geriatric psychiatrist, because while psychiatry and neurology overlap, they both treat the brain. Neurologists treat disease processes, MS, Parkinson's disease, strokes, things like that. And there are a lot of things they can do to help people there. With the behaviors, that falls more under the psychiatrist's realm. And when you go into when you fall into the behaviors, and a geriatric psychiatrist is really the doctor who specializes in treating those particular behaviors so that people can continue to be safe. A lot of them can continue to live at home with help or in facilities. But the main thing is we want to get those behaviors under control. So if someone is dealing with an elderly relative who does have the behaviors, I would recommend a geriatric psychiatrist. But if you're just curious, is saying, I'm seeing these changes in my mom or dad, and I don't really know what it means, you can go to a neurologist, a geriatric psychiatrist, or even there are groups out there that do cognitive testing and also specialize in the diagnosis of dementia.
Excellent, thank you. And just one of the other, just from practical perspective, neurologists in my experience are usually booked like 4 to 6 months out. I also find it's easier to get an appointment with a geriatric psychiatrist in terms of what you're doing. This next question I love. What do you do to convince an arrogant and stubborn 93-year-old to cooperate with you as a geriatric care manager? How do you handle that?
Okay, so I've never had that problem before. No, I'm just kidding. We face that all the time. What's important to know is that when someone has dementia, the disease takes away their insight. So they don't see what we see. I have a question I ask every new client, which is, do you notice any change in your memory? And it doesn't matter how severe the memory loss is. The most I've ever heard somebody admit to is, well, my memory's not as good as it used to be, but it's not that bad. So what we do is, what my rule of thumb and my tip to families is this: because the person doesn't have insight, their judgment is affected. They could be in an unsafe situation or an unhealthy situation and not realize it. It is always okay, and in fact recommended by me, to tell little white lies in order to get the person to come along if you're looking to protect their safety or dignity. If you try to be very linear and straight up with someone and saying, Mom, you can't live home anymore, look, the house is a mess, you haven't showered in months, you're not eating, your medications are all over the place, you're moving to an assisted living, Mom is never going to agree. So what we do is we start out slow. We start with the assessment. We start to address one little problem at a time, but always starting with safety. And I will tell you, we're very charming. Very slowly, we can worm our way into their hearts, and at some point, they'll forget what life was like before they knew us. They love all the help that they get and all of the attention. So in all the years I've worked with hundreds of people, I only ever had one client that I wasn't able to win over, but with time, I could have done it. I know it.
Absolutely. We had a comment from one of our guests here that they had that situation where the surviving spouse was lost and depressed, and moved then to an assisted living. And while they were complaining that they were in the assisted living, they were clearly just happier from a socialization. And then the family's happier because you know that there's someone who's going to be able to be there to care for your loved one. The other little white lie trick, and I don't know whether or not you've used it before, but driving is obviously a huge issue. We have used we had to take the car to the shop, and it just mysteriously didn't come back again, and that didn't really seem to be a problem. Together with I'm not sure why the car won't start. Well, it might be because somebody maybe disconnected some of those wires that are necessary for the car to be starting. And again, we're looking out for people's best interest in terms of doing that. But also, I think, Trish, one of the things that you do is you provide tools to the family members about how to have those conversations, because if you haven't dealt with this, it is so emotionally devastating to see your loved one who, when you were younger, strong, healthy, your role model, your mentor, being in this situation is just so emotionally challenging. And so I think, Trish, one of the other comments before we end here is, how do you then support the family members so that they're able to better, I'm going to use the word pivot, to their new job that they have as a result of their loved one's medical condition?
Mm-hmm. It's a tough transition because, and in particular with dementia, I know we're heavy on dementia today, but it's such a prevalent illness right now. Dementia changes the person. And, families say all the time, like, my mom's not my mom anymore. It's really hard. And for families who are actually living with mom and taking care of mom, my best advice for families who are really in a caregiving role is to really make a conscious effort to make time for yourself. And in a caregiving situation, the most important person is the actual caregiver, because if something happens to the caregiver, the ship goes down. So so the caregiver needs to make sure that he or she is getting breaks, and it's worth the investment to pay to have other people come in and help share the care. I have stories in my own family. I'm a nurse, I can handle a lot, but there have been situations where I have had to call others to help me share the care for my own mental well-being. So So what we do is we do a lot of hand-holding with the family. Our communication's primo, like we are in touch with the families all the time. We have to help coach them along and support them, because some of the decisions they're making are tough. Like you said, you know, I always say it doesn't matter if the mom is 95 and the kid is 75, you know, you're my kid. You don't tell me, I tell you, you know, and that dynamic can be really uncomfortable for both parties. So we're here to provide objective support and coaching to help them get through it.
Excellent. So one last question. So let's say that they're not here, their aging loved one, they're here, their aging loved one's in California. How can somebody find a geriatric care manager in a distant location?
Well, I'm part of the Aging Life Care Association, which I mentioned earlier. It's 2,000 members nationwide, even out to Hawaii and Alaska, believe it or not. And there are care managers everywhere. And in order to be part of our professional association, everyone is vetted by education, experience, certification. So you really can't go wrong with someone from the organization, because we've all been put to the test to make sure that we have the experience necessary to help families.
Excellent. So, and if people need more resources, on this page here, we have sort of two sets of resources. So Porzio Planning, this is a website that we at Porzio put together, really focused on the needs of families and individuals around estate planning, around elder law, around asset protection planning, around planning how to pay for long-term care, special needs, and unfortunately the litigation that sometimes arises, you know, as a result of that. So there's lots of free information there. This is a webinar series. Copies of the videos of all the webinars are there, as well as my partner Crystal West Edwards has been starting a video series called Care Conversations with Crystal, where she's really focused specifically in the elder care area with people who would have been the spokes on that wheel that we had on the prior slide. The most recent one was actually an interview with a funeral director, which was really interesting and fascinating. I'm not saying that just because, you know, with what it is that I do for a living, it's a little bit probably closer to home, but the idea of how you can make that day special instead of making it a burden, to really turn it into a celebration. He just has some great stories, so I encourage you to look at that. And then Trish, I know at peaceagingcare.com you have additional resources for the community as well.
Sure do. Yes, we do. Welcome to come.
Yeah, excellent. So with that, we're sort of at the top of our hour. Oh, confirm the name of the form for the course of care. It is a POLST form. P, physicians, O, orders, L, life, S, sustaining, T, treatments, POLST. That is the name of the form. And again, you know, if you're going to do that with your doctor, Trish, would you recommend that you would let the doctor know in advance that you're looking to have a consultation around that specific document?
Oh, for sure. I think it's a good idea to let them know. It takes time. That's not a conversation you want to rush.
Yeah, so that is not a 10-minute visit to the doctor. So with that, as I said, we're at the top of the hour. Trish, thank you so much for joining us today. Just so you know, we do Zooms like usually with a glass of wine, and this is the kind of stuff we sit around talking about, because we talk about what's going on with our clients, and you know, are there different perspectives? So are there different ways to be able to help people? So we love what we do. We hope that you got some of the passion out of it today. If you have any other questions, there's contact information through the two websites that are there. We appreciate you listening, and we hope that we were able to take an hour and you're walking away much more educated than you were before. So with that, thank you all. And Trish, thank you so much. Take care.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, everybody.